Hi, I'm Espen Kraft, and just for a second, please come back with me to the year 1986. And Roland are confused. The Yamaha DX7 rules the world, and Yamaha's flagship synths, the DX1 and DX5, has it all. And Roland needs a solution. What can they do? They don't have a flagship synth anymore. The Jupiter 8 is long gone, and the JX8P has 6 voices, whereas the DX1 and DX5 has 32 voices. So what can Roland do to take back what Yamaha has taken from them over the last couple of years? Well, they come up with the Roland Super JX, the JX10. You take a large keyboard and you stack 2 8Ps inside of it, and you have the JX10. 12 voices of analog delight. Unfortunately, the JX10 had very poor MIDI implementation, so Roland quickly packed all the goodness of the JX10 into the MKS-70. And in the MKS-70, they also enhanced the MIDI functionality. And another guy, Vecoven, found out that he could make a better firmware for the MKS-70 and the JX10. And fast forward to 2020 and February, and I'm going to install the Vecoven Firmware 3.21 into this MKS-70 today. And not only that, I'm also going to use this controller, the MPG-70 from Retroaktiv, to control the MKS-70 and the JX8P. So just sit back, relax, and let me take you back to 1986 and Roland's last analog synth monsters. But before we do anything, I have to install the Vecoven version 3.21 into the MKS-70. And that means I have to take this somewhat apart. And there's screws on the sides and in the back and underneath as well. So I better get going. So now I can just slide the top off, and here we have the inner guts of the MKS-70, and in this envelope the Vecoven chip has arrived on time. Let's unwrap it and see what we've got. Ah yes, 3.21 Super JX flash module, and that's supposed to replace the ROM-A chip on the controller board, and the instructions for the Vecoven tells us to remove both voice boards to get to this a ROM chip, but I'll just do a quick and dirty and pull it out without doing that and just installing the new Vecoven chip, and it works alright. And here's the old A-ROM chip, which is now ready for the trash bin. And here are the 2 voice boards, practically 2 JX8Ps wrapped in this solid box, which is the MKS-70. JX10 MKS-70 module board. Okay, let's fire it up and see what we've got. Yes, 3.21, we're ready to go. And this is the setup for today's video. I have the Yamaha DX7 as a master keyboard, I have the controller, the MPG-70 from Retroaktiv, and I have the MKS-70 up and going to the right there. And with the Vecoven chip installed, I can now control every MIDI parameter of the MKS-70 from this programmer itself. So let's go through the sections. We have a DCO1 and DCO2 section. We have the filter section, the VCA section, and aftertouch and chorus section. And we have envelopes, extended envelopes. So pretty much the right side of the controller is now what I'm going to use since I have version 3 of the Vecoven installed to the MKS-70. The MPG-70 also has a nice OLED display that shows settings and values. I have assign buttons, I'll get back to those later, and an encoder knob, and the very important upper-lower button. I'll get back to that in a moment. However, there are more to this controller. We have a section with pulse width modulation and LFOs and envelopes associated with that. And those are to be used if you have the Vecoven version 4 installed, which gives you new sound possibilities with the MKS-70 or Super JX, which I don't have in this MKS-70 in this video. So how is this all hooked up? Well, I don't use the programmer in input of the MKS-70, instead I use MIDI. I run a MIDI out of the MPG-70 into the MKS-70, and I run a MIDI out of the master keyboard and into the MPG-70. The standard original controller, the PG-800, would normally control the MKS-70 from the PG input at the front there. I don't use that in this video. But as you can see, I use MIDI, and touching the keyboard sends a signal to the MKS-70 so I can play it through the MPG-70 controller. So let's take a look at the sound architecture of the MKS-70 and Super JX. And here's where the Super JX and MKS-70 are different from the JX8P. The JX8P only has those 6 voices. But the MKS-70 and Super JX has 2 layers, those 2 voice boards, if you remember from the installation. You have the upper and lower voice boards, and these can be combined in different ways. And on the display you can always see the balance between the upper and lower voice boards, those 6 voices each. And here's where this controller really shines, because you have that balance fader, so you can balance it between the upper and lower voices. A task that is really cumbersome on the synth itself, but it's very easy to do with the MPG-70, and you cannot do this with the PG-800. So here I've muted the lower board, and you hear only the upper voice board, which is a standard electric piano. But the lower board has this Bell DX-like attack, and this is how you can get those DX type of sounds out of the Super JX MKS-70. And it goes into Roland D50 territorium with its PCM samples. These are all analog, of course. So the ability to adjust the balance between upper and lower voice board are really cool. And check out the display on the MKS-70 itself. It will always show the fader movement. Back in the day when I toured with the Super JX for a couple of years, I would have loved to have this fader to adjust the balance between my sounds in the upper and lower boards, but well, I didn't have it back then. So let's expand on this a little further. I've loaded in another patch with a bass in the left hand and a clav sound in the right. So there's a split here somewhere around the C note. There's a split, and I have bass on the left and the clav on the right. You can split at any point you want on the Super JX MKS-70. And here's where the fader comes into play again. I can adjust the balance between those 2 voices. But what if I want to edit one of the voices only, the upper or lower board? Then I can use the button upper lower and just enable the upper board for editing. The display will always show me what board, upper or lower, I'm editing on. So let's adjust the VCA, the volume for that voice, that patch. The bass is unaffected. So let's do a little edit on the lower board. I just press the lower board button and that lights up. And I can adjust parameters on that. And the clav sound will not be changed. But if I want to edit both sounds at the same time, I just press the button again. And now I edit on both the upper and lower board. So if I change the filter setting now, it will affect both voice boards. Let me just adjust the balance a little bit more. So let's adjust the filter then on the bass. That's the lower voice. And the filter on the clav did not change. That remains untouched. So let's change the filter on the clav sound. a little bit more release perhaps on the clav sound. Okay, let's have a little fun with the classic soundtrack patch. So there's an octave in difference between the two patches on the upper and lower board. So let's just have some fun here and manipulate this. Chorus 1 or chorus 2 or off. So let's check out the aftertouch possibilities. But you can also adjust the aftertouch for volume and intensity. So let's check out the patch generator of the MPG-70 controller. It's very simple. You just choose the sound category you want, and you can limit those parameters as well within those categories, and you just press enter. So let's change this sound into a randomly generated pad sound, because I'm in the pad section. And check out the display. It goes through every settings and choose a random one. Sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you get a nice starting point, and sometimes you get a very nice sound. But you can always build on that if you have a nice starting point. bass sounds. Another little nifty thing is a chord programmer. This is all part of the MPG-70, but very close to what 80s synths had in the past. You took a chord and recorded that chord, and now you could play that chord over the whole keyboard. This is just before Robin Hood is about to enter the crossbow competition at the tournament. Another feature that I really like about the MPG series of controllers is how you can assign a set of fader movements to one controller knob, assign A or B. So in this case I want to control the filter and the release time of a sound. So the more I open up the filter, the more release time I want on the sound. And that's 2 different separate fader movements in all, and I can have 5 of those into one controller knob. So here the filter is pretty closed and the release time is short. But now I adjust the controller, the assign A, the filter opens up, and so does the release. All done in real time from one controller knob. Closing down the filter, and the release time goes down with it. So how do we do that? Well, it's very simple actually. You just press the assign button on the MPG-70 and that takes you into the assign menu. And you can have up to 5 layers of fader movements from different faders. I'm just going to do 2. And all I have to do to assign the first one, the first layer, is hold down the encoder button, that's called shift, and I press any fader I want. And I press the filter cutoff fader, and that fader is now assigned to layer A. And now I can also set the limits of that reach. I don't have to go from 0 to 127, I can limit the reach if I want to. So let's adjust that a little bit, from pretty close to pretty open. And just cursor back to the layer setting and choose layer 2. I hold the encoder button down and I touch the fader, the release fader of the envelope. And now I can set the limits of that reach as well. So I can go from totally no release to a full release if I want to, or limits that suits me better. Hey, welcome back. I hope you had fun watching this video. I had a lot of fun making it. These are fantastic analog synths from the mid-80s, and with a new controller like the Retroaktiv MPG-70, it opens up a lot of possibilities with these synths. And with the new firmware for Vecoven inside, you can have a lot of new stuff that was impossible to do with the original firmware. So I highly recommend both a new firmware if you have an MKS-70 or a Super JX or a JX8P. And I also highly recommend you checking out the website of Retroaktiv for this controller. As always, I'm Espen Kraft, I am the 80s, and I hope to see you soon. Cheers!